let's go ahead and address that motion from the state, and then we'll get to Mr. Bryan's motion.
Thank you, Judge. Yes, OCGA 1791 is the statute that governs directed verdicts. And there's also case law out there that, of course, the court is to view all the evidence presented at trial in the light most favorable to a guilty verdict and ask whether any rational trier of fact could have found the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So that includes, Judge, not just direct evidence, but circumstantial evidence as well. In this particular case, all the defendants have been charged in this as a party to the crime. And of course, we've got directly committing the crime and then helping, which is intentionally aiding or abetting in the crime. And then we've got intentionally encouraging someone to commit the crimes. So we've got all of that charged together. Looking, of course, at count 1, malice, murder, you may also find malice when there does not appear to be significant provocation and all the circumstances of the killing show an abandoned and malignant heart. No specific length of time is required for malice to arise in the defendant's mind. Malice may be formed in an instant, and instantly a fatal wound may be inflicted. That, of course, is the current pattern jury charge 2.10.10 on malice murder. In this particular case, there isn't significant provocation. Mr. Arbery ran away from these men for 5 minutes, tried to get away, and was being forced down the street by Mr. Bryan in his dark pickup truck, accelerating towards him. He tries to go around Travis McMichael. Travis McMichael steps out into the street, blocking the street, pointing a shotgun at Mr. Arbery, and Mr. Arbery tries to go around the passenger side of the vehicle. Travis McMichael traps him and tracks him with that shotgun up to the front of the vehicle and basically encounters him right there. He's so close that Mr. Arbery, he passes this. He is so close that when he does this, he's instantly shot. Instantly shot. The video itself speaks for itself. There is that much time, and that shotgun blast goes off, and Mr. Arbery shot point blank. The trajectory was, as you saw from the medical examiner, right here, straight through. That's where their shotgun pellets are. That's where that injury is. So at this point in time, we have met the burden to prove no significant provocation except Mr. Arbery coming around the front. The medical examiner talked about fight or flight. And I understand the defense is going to argue, well, it's the victim's fault. He should have kept running. It's the victim's fault. He shouldn't have been exhausted. It's the victim's fault. He shouldn't have gone to defend himself. It's the victim's fault. He had all kinds of options and alternatives in the face of their 5-minute attack on him, and therefore it's his fault. But that's not what the law is. The law is about the defendants doing a 5-minute attack that eventually resulted in malice murder. How do you see the malice here? Abandoned and malignant heart. You take a shotgun, you point it at somebody, you track them around as they try and run away from you, and when they turn on you, you immediately fire and shoot. The state asks you to deny the directed verdict for malice murder for Travis McMichael and also for Greg McMichael. He is charged as a party to the crime. Greg McMichael had his .357 Magnum on him. He is also yelling at Mr. Arbery. We know that he previously had threatened Mr. Arbery with, "Stop or I'm going to shoot your effing head off." So he'd already told this man, "I'm going to execute you if you don't stop." So at that point in time, we've got Mr. Bryan coming forward. He sees the shotgun. He sees it pointed not only at Mr. Arbery, but it's actually pointed at himself because he's right behind Mr. Arbery. And he doesn't do anything. He doesn't stop. He doesn't slam on the brakes. He doesn't yell, "Oh my God." He doesn't swerve immediately out of the way to get off the road into a ditch to avoid the shotgun. He keeps going. He keeps accelerating. He keeps driving Mr. Arbery toward the man with the shotgun, thus aiding and abetting intentionally Arbery having to run towards a man with a shotgun. Mr. Arbery could not turn around. Mr. Arbery could not run away back because Mr. Bryan is accelerating toward him with his black pickup truck. Therefore, he is also a party to the crime of malice murder because it shows an abandoned and malignant heart on Travis McMichael's part and aiding and abetting in that by both the defendant, Greg McMichael, and Mr. William Roddy Bryan. With regard to felony murder specifically, as the court is aware, felony murder must have directly caused the death or played a substantial and necessary part in causing the death. This, of course, is from our new jury charges 2.10.20 on felony murder. And in this case, all 4 of the underlying felonies played a substantial and necessary part in causing the death, because without those 4 felonies, Mr. Arbery wouldn't be dead. So we've got our old-fashioned but for, and that's what we're talking about here. Played a substantial and necessary part in causing the death. But for these actions, Mr. Arbery would still be alive. So when we look at, specifically, I'll take them in the order Mr. Hogue went, we're talking about count 5 felony murder and count 9, which is criminal attempt to commit false imprisonment on Burford. The indictment reads, in violation of the personal liberty of Ahmaud Arbery, did unlawfully chase Ahmaud Arbery through the public roadways of Satilla Shores neighborhood in pickup trucks, did attempt to confine and detain Ahmaud Arbery without legal authority on Burford using a Ford F-150 and a Chevy Silverado. So they attempted to confine him, but he managed to get away. They basically both used the pickup trucks. So we've got Mr. Bryan, principal, actively attempting to detain Mr. Arbery. We've got Travis McMichael in his pickup truck. Circumstantial evidence that he is actively attempting to detain Mr. Arbery, because why? Mr. Arbery turns around from the white pickup truck and runs back the other way. And this is after Greg McMichael is in the truck yelling, cut him off, cut him off, cut him off. So at this point, we've got all 3 men acting in concert to attempt to confine him there. Well, how do they do that? They go ahead and do that by aggravated assault with their pickup trucks, by placing him in reasonable apprehension of receiving serious bodily injury. Well, what does that mean? It means their actions, what were they doing? They're using these pickup trucks with the aggravated assault to confine and detain him. So the state has proven that they use these pickup trucks in a manner that would reasonably put someone in fear and apprehension of receiving bodily injury. What does that mean? They scared him. They scared him with the aggravated assaults. And that was part of the false imprisonment. We're going to scare you into stopping by using these pickup trucks to cut you off and run you into a ditch. They were doing it in concert with each other. I want to be real clear. The defense is attempting to conflate conspiracy, which is we pre-planned this thing, or conspiracy, which is wink and a nod. No, we're talking party to a crime, okay? Conspiracy is a completely different charge. We are going to ask for it, but in this case, this is a party to a crime, which is intentionally doing these things to aid and abet. Mr. Bryan's in his driveway. He intentionally gets in his pickup truck to aid and abet the McMichaels, who he sees are actively trying to detain Mr. Arbery in violation of his personal liberty, falsely imprison him. He's actually in the top of his driveway looking down. The white pickup truck, he can see it. Mr. Arbery's running back toward him. They can see that Mr. Bryan is now pulled out. They make a decision based on this to go around homes, but for their decisions on Burford, but for their attempt to falsely imprison Mr. Arbery would not be dead. The false imprisonment on Burford substantially contributed to his death because it's what made him stop running. They didn't allow him to run up Burford and on to Zellwood, which would have then led right out of the neighborhood. Because if he'd gone up Burford, gone over Zellwood, he'd eventually gotten to Satilla Drive and could have gotten away and he wouldn't be dead. So this substantially contributed. But for these actions on Burford, none of the rest of it would have happened. So what did happen? Well, he then has to run back. Mr. Bryan, of course, once again cuts him off. He then immediately turns up homes to get away from Mr. Bryan in his pickup truck, which has now cut him off from his route going out Satilla Drive. But for those aggravated assaults which were used to falsely imprison him there on Burford, he would not have been going up Holmes, which then led him to encounter the white pickup truck coming down Holmes. We have him trapped like a rat. He ends up with no place to go, and he ends up exhausted, fight or flight, turns around the corner, and is shot. So all of this led up immediately to the death. And therefore, it's a question for the jury.